know who you are, but introduce yourselves for the record.
Okay, I'm Carolyn Labey. I'm Minister for International Development. I lead on the Island Identity project, which I guess is relevant if you're asking me questions about that. And I'm also Assistant Minister for External Relations.
Thank you. And
my name is Gillian Challoner. I'm Interim Head of Programme at Jersey Overseas Aid.
thank you. So today we're going to have a fairly focused hearing as our quarterly hearing. Essentially, we're going to start off with some questions about the international situation as you see it and how that might be affecting your work, primarily in terms of Jersey Overseas Aid and international affairs. And then we will move on to the island identity questions for the second part of the meeting, if that's okay. So if I can start off, just to give some context, we know that the world seems to be quite an uncertain and unstable place in certain areas at the moment. So we think primarily of what's going on in Ukraine, what's happening in Gaza, but also there have been some questions raised about the Rwanda-Congo situation. Mm-hmm. So can you provide us an update on the ongoing aid provided to those impacted by conflicts, so generally, and international emergencies, first of all?
Yeah, so we have our international development budget and we allocate a certain amount, we earmark a certain amount for emergencies at the beginning of the year. Obviously, that budget can change. Usually later on in the year, we might make amendments to it, which have an impact on our other allocated budget areas. We allocate to a pooled fund because we feel that allocating for emergencies in that way, it allows the agencies to have certainty, and they're the ones that know what's going on in the ground. It's sort of in Yemen, Syria, South Sudan, so they have the monies there and they can react readily.
Can I, just ask you a question now? You mentioned about potentially having to utilise funds elsewhere. And when you do that, are we potentially looking at certain groups being impacted if you're having to pull funds from maybe projects, or is this a case of maybe pulling projects from budgets that are not kind of on the front line?
We don't, well, again, at the beginning of the year, we go through a process of allocating a certain amount of monies to our sustainable development grants. And we always give ourselves a bit of leeway so we can respond to emergencies later on in the year. So I wouldn't say that we're going to leave ourselves short in those instances.
Could you tell us a bit about these pool funds? So what does a pool fund mean? How does it work?
Well, we give some monies to UN OCHA, which is the organised, I always forget, coordinated humanitarian assistance. And they'll be working in particular areas of conflict and emergency.
And so they essentially choose where the money goes. So does that in some ways help depoliticise? So, I mean, I'm presuming, and sometimes you would come under pressure as a minister to fund certain responses or not to fund certain, depending on what the politics.
Indeed.
And does that therefore maybe take some of that heat out, and you can just say, actually, we don't need to make that decision about crisis response? Or do you still direct that in a way?
Well, there are different organisations that do different things. For example, the UNHCR deal with refugees. Yeah. So we know there's desperate need to help the refugees in Bangladesh and South Sudan. So we will allocate a certain amount of monies there. And if they're not earmarked for specific things, we know that they're going to help refugees, but we're non-specific as to how.
And just, yeah, to add to that, the way that the UN OCHA operates is that they have their own network of local NGOs who are on the ground, who are vetted. So it does take the pressure off in terms of the due diligence, because we know the practices and the processes that they will go through to vet those agencies that are working on the ground, who have the speediest response in an emergency.
Okay. And could you tell us, since the last hearing that we had with you on the 19th of September, any specific details of work that's been carried out since then? Any examples of?
Emergency work?
Yeah. Or areas more?
Well, since our last hearing, we've obviously been given our budget for this year, so we can make contributions to those pooled funds. We make them at the beginning of the year because there's not much point in them having them at the end of the year, where they can plan. So we have allocated those monies.
Okay. Now, can I ask about, so if you can give an update on Jersey's response to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. So I think in our last hearing it was noted that there was an agreement regarding a pooled fund based in the occupied Palestinian territories, and that was pending with the UN. So is there any update on what's been done in Gaza and in that area?
No, there's nothing much more to report. I don't think we've allocated any direct funding since then.
There is a pooled fund that we have £200,000 committed to for the occupied Palestinian territories with UN OCHA, but it's not direct funding, it's through the OCHA pooled fund.
Okay, so that money, and has that been allocated yet?
It's been allocated. I think the grant agreement is in process, that one, in February. But there was another one last year as well.
So the one last year went?
Yes.
When did that go, roughly? Is that towards?
I'll check.
Okay.
I'll have to come back to you on that.
It's not of utmost importance, but it would be good to know. And so there's no hold up around that 200,000 that's going to go into the OCHA? There's no...
It's just the grant agreement process can sometimes take a few weeks to go through.
Where's the delay? Is that from Treasury? Or is that...
No, I don't think it's from Treasury. It's penciled to go out in February, so I think that one is in process. It's just getting the signatures signed on both sides.
Well, we've only got one day of February left, so do you think it will go out in February, Minister?
It's been committed in February.
Commissioners have made the decision.
But just to be
So
clarified, is
process.
that money that you already hold? It doesn't need to be sent to you from Treasury. You've got the money.
Well, the Treasury hold our monies.
Right. So you haven't been. Have you been allocated your budget for the year? Have you been given your budget for the year yet?
Yes.
But
in Treasury.
they just haven't released it.
Well, as Gilly said, it's going through the process of getting all the paperwork done.
Okay.
It's
But you don't
imminent.
think there's any political hold up?
No,
There's no.
no.
Okay. Thank you. Will you update us when that's been done?
Yes,
Thank
sure.
you. Okay. And if I can just ask now about the conflict that's happening between the Democratic Republic of Congo and the armed groups, or what's sometimes called the rebels, the M23 rebels, who many believe are being backed by Rwanda. I know there was a question that was written and submitted by Deputy Jeune, which you were down to answer as an assistant minister. Mm-hmm. And if I can just refer to that, because I don't think it got asked, perhaps because Deputy Jeune wanted to wait for the minister to return, but she's asked whether or not that situation is having any particular impact on the bilateral relationship between Jersey and Rwanda, which was enshrined in 2016 in its MOU. And I know that you're not answering this in your capacity as external relations, but insofar as it might relate to your JOA activities, she asked whether or not this was maybe inadvertently supporting or legitimising the actions that may contribute to regional instability. So do you have any concerns, first of all, about what's going on in that area?
I have plenty of concerns of what's going on in that area, and we're watching it very closely. But speaking for Jersey Overseas Aid International Development, we are not bilateral donors. Unlike the UK government and other governments, we give no monies to the Rwandan government. All international development monies go to NGOs that we work with on the ground to help impoverished people. And so as far as that goes, we are continuing to monitor the situation, but that doesn't affect the government and what is happening allegedly.
So am I correct in thinking that you've got 5 target countries that you have relationships with?
We have 6.
6.
Yes.
Can you just remind us who they are?
So they're Rwanda, Malawi, Zambia, Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, and Nepal.
Okay.
So 5 in Africa and
5 in Africa. Yeah. And so in terms of your relationship with Rwanda, can you just describe that to us? What does that involve in real terms?
So we've always had a good relationship with Rwanda, quite a long one. We started our Dairy for Development, sustainable development there back in 2005, I think it was, with one artificial insemination technician that we sent out there to train locals in that field. Since then, we've engaged in programs with other agencies, including the RJNHS. And at the minute, we have 4 Dairy for Development programs in Rwanda.
And have you got any concerns that maybe this can be for your department or governments more generally, that their relationship with Rwanda, given that Rwanda is increasingly being seen as a bad actor internationally in the conflicts with Congo, have there been any concerns raised around Council of Ministers about either changing that relationship or using any influence to raise concerns with Rwanda directly?
There hasn't been anything around the Council of Ministers thus far. As I said, international development deals with the agencies, not the government. But wearing an assistant minister's hat, the MOU that was signed in 2016 was actually superseded last year when the Minister for External Relations signed a new MOU with the High Commissioner of Rwanda in the island over here. That does not have any financial implications. It's more diplomatic and to work with the country and extend dialogue. So that would be a means of expressing our thoughts about the situation.
Can I ask, Minister, have you ever found that the Council of Ministers have been in this paradoxical position, for instance, where, say, the External Relations Minister recognises the legitimacy of the government that he is in correspondence with, and then from a JOA perspective, of course, then you look at potentially the way how the government is acting and the impact that's having on some of the people that you're also trying to help as well?
Well, the whole purpose of setting up Jersey Overseas Aid as a commission in the way it is to remove it from that political element. So the governance of Jersey Overseas Aid It's governed by 6 commissioners, 3 states and 3 non-states. Whilst we recognise that our funding is first and foremost for the beneficiaries, for the people we're trying to help, we are also answerable to the Jersey taxpayer. So we have to consider value for money and working with the agencies, properly vetted agencies that we work with, to fulfil the aims and the objectives that are set out in our strategic plan. So that kind of removes the political influence, if you like, because as I've stressed, we don't deal with the Rwandan government. The External Relations Minister, however, does.
So can I just ask, so I've certainly had correspondence from a Jersey person, and they've informed me that one of the parish churches, for example, I won't necessarily name the church, but it has a relationship with an Anglican and a city in the Republic of Congo, which is Goma. And we know that Goma was one of those towns which was recently attacked, and that we saw on the news there were some terrible scenes where, you know, young children have lost limbs, the ones that haven't died, and that's at the hands of the M23 rebels. Now, if we've got a situation where either directly or indirectly Jersey's doing business or providing, you know, economic support one way or another for Rwanda, which is then funding rebels, is there a moral responsibility to reconsider programs that involve Rwanda, do you think?
Well, commissioners are always looking and considering their countries and indeed their themes. And we're due next month to look at our strategic plan to refresh the countries that we're in. But as I said, we have, for example, 4 dairy for development programs in Rwanda at the minute. What we really don't want to do is what the US are doing, is just withdraw everything. Because at the end of the day, Rwanda is the 162nd out of 193 countries of the on the HDI that's the poverty scale. So they're still a very poor country. However, what is going on, you know, we obviously have to consider, and we have to consider that aid workers have been killed in Goma, and there have been at least 3,000 deaths. But the External Relations Minister, as I said, they've got no financial impact there. Their job is diplomacy and dialogue with the country.
And in terms of aid to Congo, do you provide any aid for Congo?
We don't have a sustainable, it's not one of our chosen countries, so we don't have sustainable development programs there. However, I'm sure, will be looking in the coming weeks on giving some emergency aid, humanitarian funding there.
I mean, there is a wider question here. So, you know, we're talking about Congo, Rwanda, and Congo. Rwanda are seen as the aggressor here, directly or indirectly. We've got the situation in Gaza where, you know, tens of thousands have been killed, but more maimed. And the situation in Europe has been quite clear-cut, with Russia are the bad guys, Ukraine are the good guys up until now, although the US intervention might have changed that. But is it a problem when Western governments, potentially including our own, are supporting maybe the aggressors that are killing and maiming people, and then at the same time we're trying to provide aid? Would it not just be better if we stopped supporting aggressive governments in the first place?
Well, I don't. As far as I can speak as Minister for International Development. Our objectives are clear in that we help the poor, the impoverished in the world, and give humanitarian assistance and assist with sustainable projects.
Okay, thank you. Max, do you have any questions at this point?
Yeah, just one quick question. I know you mentioned, Minister, that there are 6 states that JOA are working in. But in all of those states, are the elections considered legitimate from a Jersey point of view? So are there democratic elections held, or is it an autocracy in some of the states that we're dealing with?
I think they are mixed.
Do they have good turnouts, like we do in Jersey?
Well, there's a point.
Well, you wouldn't necessarily want 100% turnout, I suspect.
Well, yeah, like I say, they're mixed.
Yeah. And do you think that potentially has an impact when we're looking at, say, taxpayer funds being used in countries that are autocratic, and are the right people actually receiving the funds that should be distributed for them?
Well, it could be argued that the stable approach of a government has advanced it quite considerably in the years that a particular government has been in power.
I mean, so this is a valid question. I think lots of members of the public, and it's been addressed before, so I think we understand the answers, but it would be helpful to know about the safeguards. So I suppose there's a paradox in the sense that the countries which need the most support are the ones with where the government infrastructure is either not there, or it's subverted, or it's corrupt in some cases. So can you talk to us about what safeguards there are around making sure that that we still help countries where it's possible, but that we make that money is directed in where it's used on the ground rather than being siphoned off?
Well, I think it is, especially if you take Ethiopia, for example. There's lots of troubles there at the minute. Gilly's recently returned from there. But we deal, as I say, with the agencies, the NGOs on the ground who assess the needs. Our partners that we're working with we do all the due diligence on them, and we assess the needs in a given place, and those are the people we help.
And if I might add to you, Labey, I have been in Rwanda recently and Malawi recently, and if you're asking about the safeguards, so the purpose of the visit that I was on was to carry out project assessments for potential projects. So we meet with the international NGO partners, but also their downstream partners, which are national or local NGOs that they partner with. And we spend many hours after sifting through the paperwork that they give us, asking them about anti-money laundering, terrorist financing, policies and processes that they have in place, and we have to have those on record submitted to us. But not only do we ask to see the policies, we ask them, the NGOs and the practitioners, to talk us through their processes and how they handle money, how they ensure safety of cash, how they ensure safety of their staff members, and many areas that we cover during that assessment.
And you presumably follow up to look at outcomes and get regular updates?
Yes, so that's the assessment that we would carry out prior to any kind of agreement. So once we've carried out our due diligence, that gets written up into a book that is handed to our Board of Commissioners, who review that, plus all of the proposal documentation. Once a project has been agreed, then we follow up every 6 months with reports that they send to us that are quite detailed, including financial reports, regular externally audited accounts, as well as external evaluations carried out midpoint and at the end of the project.
Thank you. So I want to ask about the recent developments in the UK foreign policy in regard to overseas aid. So you'll be aware, Minister, that the UK has made what they call a tough decision to significantly reduce their overseas aid budget to direct that towards defence spending, not without, of course, some US pressure for that. What does that have any implications for either for Jersey in terms of the work that you're doing, or just for the wider situation in terms of international development, do you think?
Well, I think it will inevitably have an impact on us, although the UK, unlike the US, who have demanded a 90-day freeze and have asked for all their humanitarian workers to return home, the UK have at least said that they are going to, whilst the announcement was yesterday, they are going to reduce their aid budget by 2027 to 0.3. So it's going to be a gradual thing. So, however, I have little doubt that that will have an impact. And indeed, we're seeing that the US, the implications of the US withdrawing is having an impact. We're getting inquiries from humanitarian workers, projects that have just had to stop. So the agencies are contacting us to see if we can do anything, any sort of bridging support.
Do you think you're in a position where you can provide that support to them?
We would have to assess each project individually.
I mean, obviously, Jersey can't make up the shortfall in terms of money. Does it have a knock-on effect, though, on the agencies that you work with in terms of their viability, whether they'll still exist in a year or 5 years' time?
Yeah, it will undoubtedly. Gilly's just back from Malawi, and it has had an impact on the agencies there, like their core work. There's two agencies that we work with that get funding from USAID. It's having an impact on them, so we're having to reassess because we co-fund with them. So we're going to have to assess what we do there.
Yeah, one of the organisations that I've been speaking to recently, which is less impacted by UK aid but more US aid, is Mercy Corps. And we have a programme with them currently in Ethiopia, but that is in its final year. And our project is separate to the USAID project. However, there are a lot of staff and core costs that are covered by USAID. They've assured us that they can continue because we're in the final year, so we're fortunate in that sense that the work will not be lost, but obviously it's very devastating for them as an organisation, and whether or not they will be able to continue in Ethiopia long term, I don't know.
Minister, you touched on about the two agencies just a moment ago. I mean, what do you think the solution is to support those agencies, obviously, when they're in a position now where there's uncertainty about funding?
Well, it will depend how much we're looking at and how, what will be required to sort of bridge the gap. If indeed it is a gap, it's meant to be a 90-day freeze, but who knows? We're just going to have to monitor and assess to see what it would take, whether we took over the project, but it might be too big for us. I mean, let's not forget the US aid is worth $71 billion. Well,
So I'm guessing that ultimately we want to live in a world where, although there is interdependency between countries and cooperation, it would be ideal to get to a situation where countries can stand on their own 2 feet and ideally not need international aid, or it's vastly reduced because they have internal systems that work. So to what extent do the UN Sustainable Development Goals seek to achieve that, and where are we with the support that you're giving for those goals in certain countries? Can you give us any examples?
Yeah, I think we have given you our huge SIFT document at one stage. I don't know if you got it, but these are our these are the Sustainable Development Goals. And with each of our projects, with each of our projects, when we go out to assess them and decide whether we're going to support the projects, the officers go through a very in-depth look and assessment, but they also assign the Sustainable Development Goals, whichever of those goals these cover.
Are you prioritising any of these 17 goals in particular for in the next year?
No, that's not how we do it. We choose the countries and the themes. And as you'll see, we've put here which ones are dairy for development, financial inclusion, and conservation livelihoods. So which themes will be touched by each of our projects?
I know you mentioned in the previous hearing about wanting to increase the number of dairy programmes, and I just wanted to know whether you could update us as a panel on that.
Yeah, so we wanted to, so when we put out a call for interested agencies that had projects to fund last year, and that's what the assessments are happening now. So we'll be looking at probably more dairy for development projects than we have recently. But at the minute, we've got 9 dairy for development projects in 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, in 5 countries.
Okay.
Not Sierra Leone. Yeah, and they're multi-year projects.
And so have you set tangible targets for this year to achieve those goals, and how would you monitor the progress of those?
The Sustainable Development Goals,
Yeah.
is that? So we have what we call the standardised indicators, which I think we maybe have mentioned, where we're asking all of our partners now to report against specific targets. So prior to that, each partner would deliver us a log frame with their own indicators, outcomes and indicators, which would all be measuring slightly different things in terms of, food security or income generation, number of partners worked with, or number of training days happening. We've now asked them to complete our standard indicators as well as completing their log frame. So we don't set targets because every single project will be different. A Dairy for Development programme will have a different number of beneficiaries and be supporting people in a different way to, say, a financial inclusion programme. But there are some which are kind of common across all, so increasing incomes of people and women's economic empowerment are 2 areas, and this will be the first year where we'll have enough data to be able to put that into our annual report.
Yeah, so you're monitoring that. That's good to see. Thank you. Do we have any questions in this area? No?
Not at the moment, no.
That's quite a handy chart because the team have put together, each of our themes in the boxes.
So I attended the event at the Arts Centre, I think,
Yes,
last
thank
year, was
you.
it in the autumn? And I was quite impressed by, in particular, about the getting more women included financially and having bank accounts or credit. Can you remind me which country that was in, or where the project?
One project, Opportunity International, was Malawi,
Malawi.
and CAFOD was Sierra Leone.
Okay. And so are you seeing some tangible benefits and some great success, stories from that?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. In fact, both of those projects have now completed, and they have applied to us for a phase 2 to go to different regions and expand on some of those wins.
And it's proper grassroots, isn't it? So you're helping
Absolutely.
villages and towns.
We've got another GIDN event coming up tonight, actually.
Okay.
I know you're busy, but
Might be too short notice for me, but it looks, yeah.
yes, but
Thanks
Deputy
for letting us know.
Andrews might fancy going along. So it's the same format, but this time it's about disability and inclusion.
Great, thank you. Good. Well, we're going to. And nothing else you want to add on this? Feel free if we've missed anything.
No, I would just like to say that I had a meeting with Sarah Champion, who's an MP, Labour MP. I had a meeting with her last week, and she is doing. She's on the International Development Committee, and they're doing a value for money look at the FCDO, International Development Programs. And she asked me lots of questions, and I set it out in a letter to her, how we do aid, how we implement our aid budget. And we've been asked if that letter can form part of their records, their evidence for their review. So I think that's quite good for Jersey, actually.
Okay. Thanks. I think what we'll do is to just ask quickly about the appointment that's been made. Are you okay to lead on that?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes. So obviously the panel notes that Edward Lewis has been appointed, and I just wanted to know what is Edward intending to do if he's not here to respond to the question, but what are his main goals in his new role?
Okay, well, obviously, I don't want to preempt his answer, but I think, and Ed would be here, but he's just returning from Nepal. He's been assessing some programs there. I think this year is going to be very much as business as usual, because obviously last year was it was an extremely difficult year for all of us, for staff and commissioners, with Simon dying, and Ed has now been appointed as director. So it's going to be very much him getting used to the role, I think, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah. Can I just ask more generally, were the appointments put out to a wider?
Indeed.
Yeah.
It was advertised internationally, and we were overseen for both this appointment and the new commissioner.
Yeah, so that's Ms. Yun Hum.
Yes.
Position. And does it attract many applicants, these roles?
The commissioner less so, because they have to be, both appointments, they have to be in the island, but less so the commissioner. The commissioner is an honorary position, unlike a lot of independent organisations that are funded by the states. My commissioners don't get paid. So less so, but that's not why they do it. Those that do it because they really want to. But both appointments are overseen by the Jersey Appointments Commission.
Thank you. So if we have any other questions that we haven't got to on this, we'll send them through. Is that okay?
Yes,
but I think
absolutely.
we've covered the broad theme, so we thank you for your responses. We're going to turn to the also important areas, but in terms of maybe but much more local focus, of course. So can you talk to us briefly about the consultation that you've just completed about the National Day and the Anthem for Jersey?
Yes. Well, as you know, Deputy, I'm very keen to pursue the aims of the Island Identity Project. We had 3 overarching objectives, 7 specific goals, and the Policy Development Board made more than 50 recommendations to various departments. There are, and 2 of which were to have a national day and to adopt an anthem for the island.
Okay. So
so that's the bearing in mind we had those 2. So we did a survey to ask members of the public what they felt about Liberation Day, because you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. If you don't suggest anything, people can't say yes, no, or whatever. I mean, the state's been criticised about holding referendums and sort of putting various options to people, so you get various options back. Yeah. So we decided to take the bull by the horns and suggest a day. We suggested Liberation Day, but we also chose to highlight the various alternatives that we'd thought of in the Island Identity Report, the 200-pager, the long report, not the summarised document. So in that report, we had 9 other possible days that could be, but if somebody wanted to come along and suggest something else, that was up to them. We had a very good response to the survey. 2,400 people responded, which on Jersey standards is a good result. And I was heartened by the fact that 1,200 were from students. So it shows that young people are engaged, or were engaged in the process.
Can I ask, was it put to students in schools that there was a survey and that they potentially had the opportunity to respond, or was it a case of them just doing it on their own accord?
No, it was highlighted, and the forms were given out, and it was up to them if they handed them in.
And did they do them on the form or online, or a mixture?
No, most of them did it on the form.
Okay. And was it primary, secondary, or both?
Both.
Both, okay.
And did you find with the results that you received there was a differentiation between, say, the older age group compared to the students?
I haven't actually analysed that because we didn't ask for people's age.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, there's no no demographic breakdown, is there? You did ask
I'm
for...
not entirely sure. I'd have to ask Freya that.
We didn't do a demographic breakdown of results. However, we can say that over 49% were under 18 because they were from students in schools, but we didn't want to bias it towards any demographic data.
No, but you could, presumably, if you wanted to extract and say, this is the under 18s response versus the remainder, which may also include under 18s, of course.
Well, I only use the statistic 1,200 because that was handed in by the schools.
Schools, yeah, okay. And so it was essentially a very simple consultation, wasn't it? There were, apart from the question about whether you represent an individual or an organisation, represent an individual.
Yeah.
It's essentially, should Liberation Day be the national holiday, Jersey's national day rather, and should Beautiful Jersey be formally adopted as Jersey's anthem?
Yeah.
Now, should we? So you feel that you've got a mandate to present P6 to the states asking for Liberation Day to be the national day?
Well, I think so, yes, because 82% came back and said they'd like to see Liberation Day adopted.
So what we've noticed there, and this maybe applies to both, you didn't ask whether Jersey should have a national day, you presumed that we should, in a sense, and said, should Liberation Day be the national day?
Yes, because the report, the Island Identity Report, made the case for it.
Yeah.
I think the UK and Denmark are two of the very few countries that do not have a national day.
Okay. Now, if I were to say that, for example, if we think of Scotland, what do we normally associate with Scotland in terms of their national day, primarily?
Well, yes, St Andrew's Day and Burns Night.
And yeah, so when I immediately think of Burns Night, but then I struggled to think of, first of all, I have to think, who's the patron saint of Scotland? And I think, okay, it's St Andrew. And when is it? And I really struggled to remember. So I had to look it up, and it's in November. But I know that Burns Night's in January. And I know that even if you're not Scottish, you probably have some neeps and tatties and maybe a weed ram to go down with it. So Was there any alternative day that was put forward in the respondents for a potential alternative or additional
Well,
day?
in the report, there were 9 alternative days. So if people were interested, they could read the report. But certainly in the feedback that we got, I'm trying to look for the statistics here.
So these would have all been volunteer because there was no suggestion in the survey about a different day. So these would all be people just volunteering an alternative.
So it was yes, no, or what do you suggest? But reference, they could have referenced, like I say, for inspiration from the report, where there is a selection of 9 different dates.
So would you be open to, if there were a suggestion coming forward that there could be an additional day? For example, we know that the corn riots has been gathering momentum in terms of local significance. Do you think that's something that you would be open to consider about how that might sit alongside of maybe an official day? So we might have Liberation Day as our St Andrew's Day, but you could have your Burns Night as the corn riots.
Absolutely. There are countries that have more than one national day. France, for example, has VE Day. They have Bastille Day, and they have Remembrance Day.
Yeah.
So, and there are countries. America has more than one. India has lots, I think.
And there's currently an anomaly, I think, which, if I remember rightly, Chief Minister Terry Lesueur tried to rectify it, but he didn't get support. Was that if Liberation Day falls on a weekend, then no bank holiday substitute is given on the Monday. Is that something that you think might need to be given consideration? Or
No.
It's not central to this.
No, it's not central to this. And that is the difference between a public holiday and a bank holiday. If it's a bank holiday, you get one in lieu. Yeah. Whereas a Liberation Day is a public day, public holiday, so it's got to be on the 9th of May.
Okay. Good, thank you.
And indeed, we haven't consulted Chamber of Commerce about having an additional day. So at the minute, it's a public holiday.
But you could theoretically have an alternative, a new day, but it wouldn't have to automatically be a bank holiday or public holiday if we had the corn riots.
You can have both.
You can have both. 2 holidays potentially. Yeah, we heard it here first. Right. Shall we move on to the national anthem section, if that's okay?
Yes.
So there's similar questions really. So this was slightly more problematic. You didn't get 50%. Or you only got 50% saying that they wanted a beautiful jersey, Mon Biot Tigeri, as we might want to call it as well, as the national anthem. Do you think you could have gone ahead and suggested that anyway?
I didn't have the backing from Council of Ministers to go ahead based on those results. However, I did get confirmation from the Council of Ministers that we should issue guidelines to, because you know, it is an embarrassment when our sports people are collecting medals on the podium and nobody knows what to play. So Council of Ministers have confirmed that they will be issuing guidelines to sports clubs, cultural organisations, that if the moment warrants a local anthem to be played, then it be beautiful jersey and the chorus.
I suppose the question becomes what mandate does the Council of Ministers have to issue that guidance? And would it be better just to have a definitive state's decision on it after all this time? Is that something you'd be open to consider?
Well, I was considering it. I was considering bringing it forward, but with 50%, I didn't feel it was 50% of people coming back saying they considered Beautiful Jersey as the local anthem, and 30% said not. So I didn't feel I had the mandate to put that.
But was there
to the
any
state.
political opposition, so irrespective of the survey results? Are there differences of opinion in COM about an alternative national anthem or the need for one?
I think everyone recognises the need for one.
Yeah. So if it had been 51%, you might have had a technical mandate. It's just it wasn't quite enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Do you want to carry on with some next section? If you think it's necessary.
Yes, yeah, sure. Obviously, with Beautiful Jersey, it was a former connoisseur of St Saviour who we often hear on Liberation Day her voice projecting from monitors when we, as politicians, gather outside the POM door. I just wanted to have your view on the importance of Beautiful Jersey to you and why you see it being so important to the island's identity.
I see us having a local anthem as important to our identity. There's all these little things that make up our identity. If we have nothing, what are we? It actually sort of helps. The more we harness our identity, the more people can get behind it. It instills a sense of belonging to islanders, to people who live here. And I think these things are good. We ought to be proud of who we are and what we are. And that means people that come and live here too, they can embrace it and feel part of the island.
In terms of when we're speaking about island identity, do you think that's covered in terms of Jersey being a cosmopolitan society and that everybody is feeling inclusive with the way how things are?
Well, you go to somewhere like America and when they play their anthem, they all stand up and they are a cosmopolitan society. They all stand up proud of their anthem.
I mean, one of the questions we were going to ask more generally, I think, and Max has touched on it. So this could apply to Liberation Day or whatever the national days are, or whatever the sense of identity is. How do we make sure that all of those things are inclusive and representative of all cultures and ethnicities in Jersey? Do you think it's the two? Is it possible to do that?
I think if you go and live, if you choose a place to live and work in, I think you go with an open mind to embrace who they are, what they are. I think if those of us who live here are not ashamed, but don't almost feel embarrassed about promoting our own identity, then what do we become?
And I guess you call it island identity, don't you, rather than necessarily Jersey identity. So people should be able to relate to the fact they live, work in Jersey and in the island, rather than necessarily having to prove they've got generations of roots.
Well, quite, and no one's asking them to give up their own identities, where their own heritage, but I think it's good to embrace where they're living now.
Yeah, Max?
No.
I've got just two more questions on this. I mean, we could talk all day in a sense. We won't, though. If Liberation Day becomes a national day, it's been suggested, I think there was a letter in the paper recently, that how do we make sure that we don't lose the historical significance of liberation if we repurpose it as a national day?
I think it will still be called Liberation Day, but by being a national day, it gives it the significance, in my opinion, it deserves. It's part of our history. Looking forward for younger generations, it instills a sense of freedom, and goodness knows, with everything going on in the world at the minute, I think it's something that we should be celebrating, the fact that we are a free, democratic society. So I think, sorry, I've forgotten the question as I was rambling on.
That's fine. And we've seen a note in the accompanying report that to the proposition that stated beautiful Jersey is not taught in all schools, which is, I suppose, a bit surprising. I would expect it to be taught as part of the Gerier programme. I suspect it is. If it were established as Jersey's anthem, would this then become part of the Jersey curriculum, so at least it would be taught in schools?
Well, yes, it should be taught. I was reminded last week, actually, that people who are now in their 70s, when they went to school over here, they had to sing Ma Normandy at the start of the school day. I think we should teach what we are choosing as an informal anthem for now. That ought to be taught, but so could a whole range of other songs be taught. We could have a compilation.
We could have the Internationale in Gerier maybe sung in, but that might be for the next government to introduce.
And Island Home, you know, Bad Lebec could put together a compilation of Jersey songs.
Thank you. Well, I think that's brought our questioning for today to a close. We may well follow up with some further question areas, but I think we've covered the broad themes. Have you got any additional points that you'd like to convey to us, Minister?
No, I'm just grateful to anyone. I shouldn't be grateful. I think we should all embrace island identity and our culture.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you for attending today, Minister, and Gillian as well. I'll ask for the